Franklin Owens was late again, and his 5-year-old daughter, Violet, was clinging tightly to his hand while her other hand clutched a stuffed bunny that had definitely seen better days. "The train's leaving, Daddy," she said, tugging at his coat. "I know, honey. I see it," Franklin replied, his eyes darting between the departures board and the map of the subway lines. Between the morning rush, his boss's threats, and the fact he just spilled coffee on his only clean shirt, Franklin was hanging on by a thread. He bent down to Violet's level. "Okay, sweetheart, we need the downtown 4 train. We'll be late for your school and I'll be late for work. Again, let's move fast." That's when he saw her. She looked lost more than lost, actually. She was standing near the turnstiles, holding a phone with no service, and eyeing the subway map on the wall like it was written in a foreign language. Her suitcase was designer, he could tell just by the way it stood out from the crowd, and her coat probably cost more than his rent. But she looked real, not snobby, not cold, just overwhelmed. Franklin hesitated, then turned to Violet. "Stay by my side, okay?" He walked over to the woman and cleared his throat. "You look like you're about to board the wrong train." Her eyes met his. They were wide and warm, and something about them made him pause. "I think I already did," she said, almost with a laugh. "I'm trying to get to Tribeca." He nodded. "You want the downtown 1 train. You're about to get on the 7, which would take you to Queens." Her cheeks flushed. "Oh my God, thank you. I haven't taken a train in, well, ever." Franklin smiled, motioning toward the right platform. "Come on, I'll show you." She followed, dragging the suitcase along. "I'm Lila Easton." "Franklin, and this is my daughter Violet." "Hi, Violet," Lila said gently. Violet waved, then leaned her head against Franklin's arm, clearly getting tired. "Long morning?" Lila asked. Franklin gave a dry laugh. "Every morning is long when you're trying to balance job interviews, daycare drop-offs, and a 5-year-old who refuses to wear matching socks." "I like rainbow socks," Violet said defiantly. "She has a point," Lila said, smiling. They reached the platform and Franklin pointed. "That's your train. The 1, just make sure it says downtown. It'll take you right where you need to be." Lila hesitated. "You're not getting on." "I need the 4, different track." He gave her a polite nod. "Good luck." She looked at him like she wanted to say more. "Thank you, Franklin, seriously. I would have ended up in Queens." He shrugged. "Happens to the best of us." Lila stepped onto her train, and the doors shut behind her. Franklin turned and headed for the stairs with Violet. "Daddy," Violet asked as they climbed, "that lady was really pretty." Franklin laughed under his breath. Yeah, she was. He didn't think he'd ever see her again. But 3 days later, Lila Easton stood outside the bookstore Franklin worked at part-time, holding a paper cup and a hopeful smile. "Hey," she said when he spotted her through the window. He stepped outside, confused. "Lila." "I was hoping I'd find you. Checked the corporate office directory. You said you worked retail, and this is the only bookstore in walking distance of where I'm staying." He blinked. "You tracked me down." "Well, I wanted to thank you properly." "You already did." She held out the coffee. "Consider this a bonus." He took it, still stunned. "You really didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. "You helped me when you didn't have to, and you were kind to your daughter. That stuck with me." He looked down at her designer boots and the tailored coat that screamed, "Not from around here." "What are you doing in New York, Lila?" "Business," she said lightly, then changed the subject. "Do you have a break soon?" He checked the time. 15 minutes. "Can I steal them?" He hesitated, but there was something magnetic about her, something that made him forget about the stress, the bills, the fact that his life was hanging by threads. "Sure." They sat on a nearby bench in the park across the street. She asked about Violet. He told her about his ex, who had left 2 years ago and hadn't looked back. About how he was scraping by, trying to get a better job. About how he was doing his best. He didn't know why he opened up to her. Maybe it was the way she listened, like nothing else mattered. And she didn't talk about herself much. Just that she had meetings in Tribeca and that she was from out of town. He didn't push. They met again 2 days later, then again the next week. Each time, she'd show up near the bookstore, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with pastries. Just passing by, she'd say, but he started looking forward to it, started watching the street more than the register. Violet liked Lila too. They all had lunch together one Saturday, and Lila helped Violet color in her princess book at the cafe. "I don't get it," Franklin said, watching her laugh with Violet. "Why are you spending time with us?" She looked up. "What if it's because I like you?" Franklin froze. "And her," Lila added quickly, smiling at Violet. "She's kind of irresistible." Franklin's heart thudded in his chest. "You're way out of my league," he said before he could stop himself. Lila leaned in, soft and serious. "Maybe you don't know what league I want to be in." He tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "I'm barely hanging on, Lila. I can't take you out. I can't afford a fancy dinner. Can't even promise I'll have a job next month." "I didn't ask for any of that." "I just mean," he rubbed his temple, "I'm not the guy you think I am." "Actually," she said, her voice low and certain, "you're exactly the guy I think you are." He stared at her, stunned. Then Violet interrupted by spilling her juice, and the moment passed. But Franklin couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said, or the way she looked at him like he was worth something. And when she left that night, Lila pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek and whispered, "I'll see you soon." He didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment Lila Easton, a billionaire in disguise, started falling for the struggling dad who showed her the right train. And neither of their lives would ever be the same again. The first time Lila stepped inside Franklin's apartment, she didn't say a word. Not at first. She stood in the doorway holding a paper bag of pastries and a container of hot cocoa for Violet, her gaze sweeping across the small living room with its second-hand furniture, toys scattered across the rug, and the faint scent of crayons and cinnamon-scented cleaning spray. Franklin was mid-apology, explaining the mess, the tight space, the flickering light in the corner, but she just turned to him and said, "This place feels like someone actually lives in it." That was 3 weeks after their first meeting. By then, she'd become a part of their routine. She showed up with takeout when Franklin had late shifts. She read Violet bedtime stories when he had to finish or resume. She never asked for anything, and that made it harder for Franklin to stop thinking about her when she wasn't around. One Thursday evening, while Violet was asleep and the television buzzed softly in the background, Franklin leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Lila rinse 2 mugs. "You always do that," he said. "What?" "Clean like you belong here." She dried her hands slowly. "Maybe I'm hoping I do." His chest tightened. "You don't have to pretend. This isn't your world. You're staying somewhere with fresh lilies in the lobby and a view of the skyline. I saw you get into a car with a driver last week." She didn't flinch. "I never said I belonged in one world or the other." Franklin folded his arms. "You didn't have to. I know what people like you are used to." "What do you think I'm used to exactly?" He hesitated. "Not this." She stepped closer. "You think care about any of that?" "I think," he said, his voice low, "you're trying to escape something. And I think I'm a convenient distraction." Lila's eyes searched his, but she didn't deny it. "Maybe I was, at first. And now. Now I'm not so sure." He didn't kiss her that night. He wanted to, and she didn't move away, but something in the air was too fragile, too real. Instead, he walked her to the elevator and stood beside her in silence. As the doors opened, she turned to him. "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't believe her. Not until 2 days later, when she showed up at the bookstore with Violet's favorite chocolate-covered pretzels and a new pair of sneakers in just the right size. She needed new ones. The soles were wearing through, Lila said before he could protest. Franklin stared at the box. "You went shopping for her." "She mentioned her feet got cold during recess," she said softly. "I listened." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he just took the box, nodded once, and watched as Violet lit up like it was Christmas morning. Later that night, after Violet was asleep, he sat beside Lila on the worn-out couch and said, "What are you really doing here, Lila?" She looked down at her hands. "Came to New York to finalize something. My father passed away 7 months ago, his estate still complicated." Franklin didn't interrupt. She continued, "He ran a global firm. I wasn't supposed to take over, but my brother, he walked away. So I did, temporarily at least. The board doesn't think I'm serious. They're expecting me to fold. Sell my shares, walk away." "Are you going to?" She glanced at him. "I don't know yet." He leaned back. "So you're a CEO?" "Interim and barely keeping up." She laughed, but it sounded tired. "I've been in boardrooms all week trying to prove I belong, and then come here and color with Violet and eat grilled cheese and it's the first time I've breathed in months." Franklin ran a hand through his hair. "So this is your escape?" "No," she said firmly. "This is the only thing that feels real." That night, before she left, she kissed him. It wasn't rushed or dramatic, just a soft, certain press of lips that said more than words could. When she pulled away, her fingers lingered at the collar of his shirt. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she whispered. He didn't stop her. The next week melted into something new. Lila started spending more time at their place, sometimes curled on the floor helping Violet build a puzzle, sometimes standing in the kitchen barefoot, humming while she stirred soup from a can. She didn't wear heels when she came over anymore. Her coat was always unbuttoned, hair tied back, and she looked more herself in those moments than she ever did stepping out of a black car downtown. Franklin didn't ask questions, but he watched her closer. One night, after Violet had gone to a friend's birthday party, and he and Lila shared a plate of cheap Chinese food on the fire escape, he said, "What happens when your board finds out about us?" She was quiet a moment. "They won't care." "I think they will. They'll care if I start missing meetings, if I lose focus, but they won't care about this." She looked at him. "Unless you're worried." "I'm not worried about them," he said carefully. "I'm worried about you, about what you'll lose." She took a breath. "I'd rather lose a board seat than lose you." Franklin didn't respond to that. He couldn't, not with the way emotions swelled too fast, too deep. A week later, Lila asked if she could take Violet to the museum, just the two of them. Franklin said yes, though his stomach twisted all morning. When they returned, Violet came running through the door holding a glittering snow globe and talking a mile a minute about dinosaurs and planets, and how Lila let her eat ice cream, before lunch, even. "She was perfect," Lila told him quietly. "You're doing an incredible job." He looked at her, genuinely thrown. "You really mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." That night, while Violet snored softly in the next room, he kissed Lila again, this time with his whole heart. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't soft. It was everything he'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "I want this." He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. But not everything could stay untouched. One morning, while Franklin was walking Violet to school, a silver car pulled up beside the curb. The window rolled down, and a man in a suit leaned out. You're Franklin Owens. He nodded slowly, shielding Violet behind him. The man handed him a sealed envelope from Miss Easton's office. Franklin didn't open it until he was alone back at home. Inside was an invitation, heavy cream paper, embossed lettering. Easton Holdings Annual Gala, formal attire required. Below that, a handwritten note. Come if you want to see the world, tried to leave for you. L. Franklin read it twice. Then he looked around his apartment, at the chipped paint, and the sink that still dripped, and the stack of overdue bills on his counter. He didn't own a suit. He didn't own anything that belonged in her world. But he wasn't going to let her walk into that world alone. He grabbed his phone and dialed the one person he hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Hey, Marcus, he said when the voice answered. You still got your tux. There was a pause, then a laugh. Did hell freeze over? Not yet, Franklin muttered, but it might. He didn't tell Marcus why he needed it. He just knew that if Lila was brave enough to invite him into her world, then he had to be brave enough to show up. The lobby of the Conrad Hotel buzzed with the clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of old money conversations. Franklin adjusted the borrowed tux that was slightly too snug in the shoulders and stared up at the chandelier glittering above him like a galaxy of diamonds. He didn't belong here. But he wasn't leaving. A sharply dressed attendant offered him a glass of champagne. He declined, fingers tightening around the invitation in his pocket. Across the room, cameras flashed as guests entered the ballroom, women in gowns that looked like they belonged on red carpets, men in tailored suits that probably cost more than his car. He stepped forward, scanning the sea of faces, searching. Then he saw her. Lila stood near the staircase, her back straight, her shoulders bare in a deep navy gown that shimmered like midnight. Her hair was swept up, a delicate diamond pin catching the light. She was speaking to an older man in a charcoal three-piece suit who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. Franklin took a breath and crossed the room. She spotted him before he reached her. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted, like the world tilted slightly in his direction. "Excuse me," she said to the man beside her, then moved toward Franklin with quiet urgency. "You came." "I said I would." They stared at each other, the distance between them feeling both microscopic and enormous. "You look," she stopped, her eyes trailing down the tux, very overdressed for grilled cheese and cartoons. "You look like you on the night." "Only if the night's for sale." He glanced around. "So this is your world." "Parts of it." "You didn't mention the part where everyone looks like they stepped out of a magazine editorial." She tilted her head. "You didn't mention you clean up dangerously well." Before he could respond, a voice cut through the air behind her. "Lila, board's waiting." A woman in a sleek suit gave Franklin a once-over, her expression unreadable. "I'll be there in a moment," Lila replied without looking away from him. The woman didn't argue. She just turned and disappeared into the crowd. Franklin stepped closer. "You didn't have to invite me to this." "That's exactly why I did." "What happens after tonight?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you believe I meant what I said." "I don't think you'd go this far just to prove a point." She took his hand, slipped something small and cool into his palm. He looked down. A silver keycard embossed with the hotel's logo. "Penthouse," she said quietly, "after." Before he could ask anything more, she turned and walked away, her gown trailing behind her like a shadow stitched from stars. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of confusion and disbelief. Franklin stood at the edge of circles he didn't belong to, overhearing phrases like acquisition leverage and international restructuring. Lila moved from conversation to conversation, nodding, smiling, commanding attention with quiet poise. But every few minutes, her eyes found his across the room. She hadn't forgotten him, and he hadn't stopped watching her. When the speeches began, Franklin stood near the back, drinkless and restless. A man in a navy suit leaned in beside him. "You with Easton?" Franklin blinked. "I'm sorry." "Lila Easton, you came in with her, didn't you?" "I wouldn't say I came in with her." The man chuckled. "Smart, she's a hurricane in heels. Board's been trying to box her out since her father died." Franklin didn't respond. The man sipped his drink. "They won't succeed, by the way. She's 10 times sharper than her brother ever was, and she's got something none of them do." "What's that?" "She listens. That's dangerous in any room full of power." Franklin turned to him. "And you are." One of the men trying to not get left behind. He walked off before Franklin could ask anything else. The speeches ended. The music swelled. Couples took to the dance floor beneath chandeliers that spun light like constellations. Franklin made his way to the elevator. The keycard slid into the slot with a soft beep. The doors opened on the top floor to a suite that was more art gallery than hotel room. White orchids stood in crystal vases. A fireplace flickered beneath a mirror the size of a billboard. Floor to ceiling, windows looked out over Manhattan, glittering and endless. He stepped inside. Lila was already there, barefoot now, hair undone, gown unzipped halfway, exposing the delicate line of her spine. She turned when she heard him. "I wanted you to see it," she said. "All of it, the world I come from." He closed the door behind him. "I've seen it. And it's not where I'd go looking for you." She crossed the room slowly. "Where would you look?" "In the museum gift shop, on a subway platform, sitting cross-legged on the rug helping Violet glue glitter onto construction paper. I think I like those places better anyway." He looked around. "This suite probably costs more than a year's rent." "It's just space." "Your father built this empire." She nodded, "And I'm starting to think I might not want it." "You'd walk away." "I'd walk towards something better." He came closer. "What does that look like?" She reached for his hand. A small apartment, a fridge covered in crayon drawings, a man who doesn't flinch at the idea of raising a little girl on his own. He swallowed. "That's not an easy life." "It's the truest one I've seen." She led him to the window, the city below pulsing with light. "I brought you here," she said, "because I needed you to know the truth. I didn't want to be just a woman who shows up with cocoa and disappears when the weather changes." "I never thought you were." She turned to face him. "Then believe me when I say I'm not going anywhere." He took her face in his hands, kissed her with everything he hadn't said. When they pulled apart, she leaned her forehead against his. "I meant what I said, about wanting this." "So do I." "Then let's stop pretending we don't know where this is going." He stepped back slightly. "Are you sure?" She pulled open a drawer in the mahogany console behind her, then turned and placed a small velvet box in his hand. His heart stopped. "I didn't buy it for me," she said. "I bought it for you to give to me when you're ready." He opened it slowly. Inside, a simple ring, platinum, elegant, timeless. He looked up at her. "You're asking me to propose to you." "I'm asking you to be brave enough to decide." "I don't have a plan." "I don't want a plan. I want you." "I've got a kid." "I've got room in my heart." "I don't have money." "I have enough for both of us." He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing into him. Everything about this moment should have felt impossible. But it didn't. It felt inevitable. He dropped to one knee, the box still open in his hand. "Lila Easton," he said, his voice rough. "You already know what I have to offer. You've seen the worst of my world. And if you still want me now, then I'm done pretending. I don't want to spend the rest of my life showing you the best of it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Will you marry me?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. And in that penthouse, sweet high above a city that had tried to break them both, a billionaire and a struggling father chose each other. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Spring arrived in New York like it had something to prove. The city bloomed, overnight parks bursting with tulips, windows flung open, the scent of roasted chestnuts replaced by fresh rain and sidewalk cafes. Franklin Owens noticed it most in the way Violet started skipping to school again. Her laughter came easier, lighter, like the world had shifted just enough to make room for joy again. Lila had become part of their lives so seamlessly it was as though she'd always been there. Not in a loud, dramatic way. She didn't try to change anything. She just showed up sometimes with her hair still damp from the shower, sometimes with paint on her hands from helping Violet with a science diorama, and stayed. The ring stayed on her finger, simple and gleaming, but never flaunted. They hadn't set a date, that wasn't the point. Lila had asked him once, while folding laundry in his too small living room, if he wanted something grand. A rooftop ceremony, maybe, or a vineyard in Italy. Franklin had just looked at her and said, "I want Violet to sit in the front row eating cookies." Lila had laughed and said, "Then that's what we'll do." The Easton name hadn't disappeared from headlines, but Lila had learned how to wield it without letting it define her. She took over the firm officially 6 weeks after the gala, after outmaneuvering a boardroom full of men twice her age. She didn't boast about it. Franklin only found out because Violet brought home a crayon drawing of Lila's big office and taped it to the fridge. One Saturday morning, Franklin was balancing a bowl of pancake batter in one hand and trying to wrangle Violet into a clean shirt with the other when Lila appeared in the doorway, holding a manila envelope with a strange look on her face. "What's that?" he asked, setting the bowl down. She hesitated. "Something I've been working on." He took it from her and opened it slowly. Inside were 2 thick folders, one labeled with his name, the other with Violet's. He flipped one open. Legal documents, paperwork, contracts. "What is this?" "I bought the building," she said, voice even. "Well, technically, Easton Holdings did, through a subsidiary, but that's not the point." He stared at her. "You bought." "Wait," she said quickly. "Let me finish. I didn't do it to take over your life. These are just options. If you want to stay here, rent stays frozen indefinitely. If you want a better unit, there's one on the top floor. Same rent. No strings. And if you want out of the city altogether, there's a house in Beacon with a backyard and a swing set." He blinked at her. "You bought me a house." "I'm not giving you anything," she said. "I'm giving you choices." Franklin looked down at the papers again. "Why?" "Because I love you," she said simply. "And because I've spent enough of my life being told what I can and can't want. I want this, us, Violet, pancakes on Saturdays. I want to build something that isn't tied to board votes or dividends." Violet, unaware of the weight in the room, wandered in and tugged on Lila's hand. "Can we go to the park today?" Lila crouched down. "You bet. I brought snacks." Franklin watched them, heart pounding. Later that night, after Violet was asleep and the city outside their window was lit gold and soft, Franklin turned to Lila as she sat beside him on the couch, barefoot, wrapped in one of his old sweatshirts. "I've never had choices," he said. "Not like this, not really." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair. You could have just written a check or had someone handle it. I didn't want to. You came into our lives like a storm, he murmured, and somehow you made everything feel calm. She leaned into his side. I didn't mean to fall in love with you. I didn't mean to show a billionaire the right train. She laughed softly. But I'm glad I did, he added. The next morning, Franklin woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Violet giggling in the kitchen. He padded out to find Lila wearing a flour-dusted apron, guiding Violet's hands as she rolled dough into awkward, lopsided circles. We're making breakfast pizza, Violet announced. That's not a thing, Franklin said, amused. It is now, Lila replied, eyes bright. After breakfast, they went to the park. Lila pushed Violet on the swings while Franklin watched from the bench, arms crossed, the breeze tugging at his collar. He still couldn't believe it sometimes that this woman, who had once stared helplessly at a subway map in heels too expensive to be seen underground, now stood barefoot on the grass, laughing as Violet shouted for her to push higher. Lila jogged over after a while, cheeks flushed. You're staring, she said. I'm trying to understand how got this lucky. You helped a stranger find the right train. He shook his head. I did more than that. She reached for his hand. You let me in. That night, they hosted a small dinner in the apartment. Just a few neighbors, some of Franklin's old friends from college, and a couple of Lila's associates who didn't blink when they had to sit on mismatched dining chairs. Franklin cooked. Lila poured wine. Violet insisted on giving everyone a tour of her room, which included a plastic tiara collection and a wall of glow in the dark stars. As the night wound down and the guests trickled out, Franklin stood in the doorway watching Lila rinse plates at the sink, hair pulled back, sleeves pushed up. Do you miss it? He asked. She looked up. What? The world you left behind. She turned off the faucet and dried her hands. No. Not even the penthouse. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist. I never had what mattered there. He pulled her close. A week later, Lila took them both to Beacon. The house was modest white shutters, wraparound porch, a backyard with a tree just perfect for hanging a swing. Violet ran through the rooms, shrieking with delight, while Franklin walked in slow circles, taking it all in. You picked this, he asked as Lila joined him on the front steps. I thought you'd like the view. He looked out at the mountains in the distance, the sky streaked orange and lavender. It's perfect. I'm not saying we have to move, she said. I just wanted you to see it. He reached for her hand. Let's do it. Really? I think Violet deserves to fall asleep to crickets instead of sirens. Lila smiled. Then let's build something real here. The move took a month. Franklin kept working remotely for the bookstore's online division. Lila split her time between Beacon and the city, where she now ran Easton Holdings with a firmer hand and a clearer heart. Violet started kindergarten in a school with a garden and a music room. She made friends fast. She always did. And one lazy Sunday morning, Franklin found himself sitting on the porch steps, watching Violet chase butterflies through the grass while Lila sat beside him, a mug of tea in her lap, her ring catching the sunlight. He reached over and brushed her hair behind her ear. I never said thank you, he murmured. For what? For choosing this, choosing us. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You showed me what mattered. He kissed her temple. You gave us a life I never thought we'd have. And as Violet laughed in the distance, and the wind rustled the trees overhead, Franklin closed his eyes and let it all sink in. Not the money. Not the house. Not the ring. But the quiet, steady truth of it all. that a woman who'd never taken the subway had found her way not just to the right train, but to the life she'd never known she needed. And a man who thought he had nothing left to offer had shown her everything she'd been searching for. Together, they hadn't just fallen in love. They'd built something that would last. The first real challenge in Beacon came in the form of a leaky roof. It had rained for 3 days straight, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that made the whole town smell like wet earth and pine. Franklin had noticed the stain in the ceiling above the guest room, a sickly bloom that appeared overnight like a bruise. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, before saying anything. When he finally told Lila, she didn't panic. She didn't suggest hiring a crew or calling someone from the city. Instead, she grabbed her boots, pulled her hair into a knot, and said, "Let's see it." He didn't expect her to climb into the attic with him. He didn't expect her to hold the flashlight steady, or crawl across the beams with her hands covered in dust, or laugh when her knees got scraped on the plywood floor. They patched it themselves awkwardly, clumsily, but together. Later that night, Lila sat barefoot on the porch, sipping hot cider, her fingers still faintly stained with sealant. Franklin stood behind her, watching the way the porch light caught the curve of her cheekbone. "You know," he said, "most people in your position would have hired a team of roofers and stayed at the Four Seasons until it was fixed." She looked over her shoulder. "I like the view here better." He sat down beside her. "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to." "You always say that." "That's because it's always true." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm still getting used to this." "To what?" "Being wanted without conditions." She didn't say anything right away. Then she turned toward him and pressed her lips gently to his. It wasn't urgent or loud, it was the kind of kiss that felt like a promise already kept. "I'll never ask you to be anything but exactly who you are," she said. "I don't think I've ever had that." "Well," she said, resting her head against his shoulder, "you do now." 3 days later, Lila woke up before sunrise and walked down to the kitchen in one of Franklin's old university T-shirts. She made coffee, cracked eggs into a pan, and set out a small stack of sticky notes on the counter beside her phone. By the time Franklin came down, rubbing sleep from his eyes, she had breakfast ready and a pen in her hand. He stopped short. "You're writing notes?" "For Violet's lunchbox." He blinked. "She doesn't even read half of them." "She reads all of them," Lila said, sliding a plate toward him. "She just pretends not to so she can make me read them out loud at the lunch table." He grinned. "You're ridiculous." "You love it." "I do." She handed him a note. It said, "You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and smarter than you realize. Eat your carrots." Franklin read it, then looked up. "You're going to ruin her for average adulthood." "That's the plan." That afternoon, while Violet was at school, Lila took Franklin to a small plot of land just outside town. It was quiet, nestled between 2 hills, with a narrow stream running along one edge and a grove of trees that turned golden in the afternoon sun. He looked around, confused. "What is this?" She pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and handed it to him. He stared at the deed. "This is land." "It's yours," she said. "Ours if you want it. I thought maybe you could build the bookstore you always talked about, the one with the reading nook and the second-hand section and the little cafe." He looked up stunned. "You remembered that?" "Of course I did." "I never told you I wanted to own a store." "No," she said, "but I listened when you talked about how much you loved working in one, and how you hated the way it got swallowed up by the chain merger. Figured you'd never say it out loud, but if I gave you the space." He stared down at the deed again. "This is too much." "It's not a gift," she said. It's a partnership. You build the dream. I'll stock the cocoa and alphabetize the fiction section. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his jacket. You think we can really do this? I think we already are. They told Violet that night. She was halfway through her spaghetti when Franklin showed her the rough sketch of the bookstore layout he'd drawn on a napkin. Her eyes lit up. Will there be beanbags? Absolutely, Lila said. And a cat. Franklin hesitated. We'll consider a hypoallergenic one, Lila added. Things moved quickly after that. Franklin began drafting real plans with a local contractor. Lila handled the paperwork and permits. Violet picked out paint swatches with the seriousness of a seasoned architect. They named it Chapter House. It was Franklin's idea, quiet, steady, full of meaning. Opening day arrived 6 months later. The line wrapped around the block. Locals came in droves, curious and excited, children tugging at parents' sleeves, older couples pointing at the shelves with nostalgia in their eyes. Franklin stood behind the counter, in a buttoned shirt Violet had picked out, watching the community come alive around him. Lila poured coffee at the cafe counter, sleeves rolled up, laughing with a teenager who spilled whipped cream on the counter. She fit here. Not because she had to. Because she chose to. When the afternoon rush died down, Lila walked over and handed him a steaming mug of his favorite roast. You're a business owner, she said. You're a barista. Don't get used to that. He kissed her over the register, too late. That night, they walked home hand in hand, Violet skipping ahead of them with a paper crown on her head, one of the bookstore's opening giveaways. Franklin squeezed Lila's hand. Do you ever miss the world you came from? She looked at him. I didn't leave it, I just built something better. They reached the porch. Violet ran inside to find her stuffed bear, and Franklin pulled Lila close. Are you happy? He asked. I'm home. They kissed under the porch light, the bookstore glowing in the distance behind them, and the future stretching out ahead like an open road. 2 years later, the bookstore was thriving. They'd expanded the cafe, hosted weekly storytime events, and added a tiny book club for local parents that met on Thursday nights. Lila still split her time between Beacon and the city, but she never missed a single parent-teacher conference or a single school play. Franklin taught Violet how to ride a bike on the same gravel path that led past the bookstore's garden. She fell twice, got up both times. One summer evening, as the sky turned lavender and the fireflies started blinking across the yard, Violet sat on the porch swing reading a chapter book out loud to her bear, while Franklin grilled dinner and Lila watered the tomato plants. Franklin looked over at her, hair tucked behind one ear, jeans cuffed neatly, hands muddy. I still can't believe this is our life. She reached for his hand and kissed his knuckles. Believe it. And he did. Because the life they'd built wasn't about grand gestures or penthouse suites. It was about mornings that started with cocoa and ended with bedtime stories, and laughter that echoed off porch beams, and a love that had been forged not in wealth, but in choice. They had chosen each other. And they would keep choosing each other. Every single day.